Hi, and welcome to Zero Page, a special edition of Programming Like It's 1979. Could be 75 with some of what we're going to look at. With me today is PSU 13, my longtime partner in crime on the Tea Leaves blog, owner and only writer at Mutable State, right? Is your blog. Yeah. And we've talked for a long time about reading old magazines, old computer magazines. And so today we're gonna kind of just like go through some of the first pages of this 1979 Lisp edition of Byte, because it's a really interesting artifact and tells you a lot about computers back in the day. Now, Steve, Pete, you had some comments about this cover, right?
Yeah, I think so. This is a one issue in a series that Byte did between, I think, 77 and 83 or 84. And every August they would do a language oriented issue, and the covers for the languages, I think, often were an illustration of either what the people who were enthusiastic about the language thought about it, or what the overall perception of the language in the community at large was. And the Lisp issue, I think, is particularly illustrative of this, because you have this sort of 2001 kind of theme, and so it's as if this language has fallen from space, where
by a much more advanced
really understand it, right? And so there's the monolith sitting there hanging in the air, and it has the main thing that you see on the monolith is all the parentheses.
Yeah. And if we look at the Lisp code here, right. I'm impressed that it uses some of Lisp's very worst features, in particular the CDAR and CAAR.
Right.
These they're not just names or commands based on the registers on the IBM 640. I can't remember the name exactly.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember actually.
They're like compound versions of them, so they're
right.
I remember it seemed very important to me when I first learned Lisp. Like I'd have to memorize these things somehow, right. And really, you never use these.
And it's also very unclear exactly which dialect of the language they're talking about here, because I don't think any of the major dialects at the time used this defined syntax. And so this to me seems like an amalgam of a lot of different kinds of things.
Scheme. Well, let's go past the cover, and I'm going to be switching back and forth between portrait and landscape modes, because sometimes the portrait mode is important, but usually landscape will give you a better view. And if we go on immediately to page 2 is an ad, and this was one that mattered to you. So when I think of this era of computing, we know today about the Apple, the TRS80, the Commodore, but right before all of that happened, there were these companies that just they were in the middle of nowhere. So this is Southwest Technical Products Corporation from San Antonio. I think of Ohio Scientific, a world where you could have a computer company based in Ohio.
Yeah, and there are computer companies in Indiana. I don't remember where Krememco was, but Krememco is another one of these names that shows up a lot.
I think the ad on the very next page is a Krememco ad.
Right.
And they're in Mountain.
I guess they're in Mountain View. All right.
So the thing that jumped out at me about this ad, and we were talking about this right before we started recording, is that this ad tells you nothing about why you might want a computer at all, right? This ad is aimed at someone who already knows they need a computer, right. With 2 CPUs, I guess. Oh no, they're different. I see, they're different lines. But if you weren't already convinced that you wanted a computer, you'd never have any interest in their products.
And this ad is also interesting because SWTP, what I remember about them was that they were one of the very many sort of hobbyist vendors. And so the kinds of stuff that you would buy from them are like a single board computer in a box with maybe some peripheral slots or something like that, which you would then do a lot of hand assembly on. And They were distinctive because they were using the 6800 and related microprocessors instead of the prevailing, 8080, Z80, 6502 kind of chip. And in particular, I think they had one of the first 6809 computers. And the 6809 is an interesting architecture because it's a lot more, what's the word? Advanced isn't quite the right word, but the instruction set is a lot more involved than something like the 6502, but it's not all the way up to like the later microprocessors, like in the Macintosh era with the 68,000 and whatnot. We're not quite there yet, but you can kind of see the evolution.
Yeah, and 6809 always felt like always a bridesmaid, never a bride. Like people tried to make it a thing in small computers. Right. For many years. The only mass market 6809 system I know of would be the TRS80 color computer or the Dragon in its British version.
And this particular ad for SWTP is also weird because it seems like they're particularly targeting like office users or something.
Daisy wheel print.
Although it's not really clear because why are they selling furniture with the computers? And
lawns,
right? So yeah, it's very eye catching.
Well, let's go on to the next page, which is another full page ad. Right. One thing that's interesting about these ads, and you'll notice this as we go through, screen capture technology was almost, I don't know if the technology was non-existent, but certainly in these magazines, hardly anyone used it. So we're going to see ads for software and games. They're going to have no screenshots, and they're going to be mostly photographs of physical items like this. And so this is a single card computer. Was this also a 6809? No, this is Z80. So Krememco. I didn't know much about Krememco, but you seem to remember them.
I just remember the ads. I mean, I think there's probably something later in the magazine where they I think used to sell sort of pre-integrated microprocessor-based business systems. And so you'd see them with like some crazy operating system that runs on a Z80, but has multitasking and multi-user features. And they also have like the giant brain-shaped terminals.
Right. And again, if you look at this ad, there's a lot of talk about it being S100 compatible. They're talking about the features. There's no use case in this ad. There's no explanation of what you might need.
And actually the very next page, the second Krememco ad, you see the photo on the bottom is like some group of people in a mythical office, all clustered around the one machine.
And a ring. Right. It's basically, I think this photo is where Severance, the idea for the and again, it's fast and you can benchmark it, but there's no idea of what you might use it for. Oh, that's amazing. So then we have, I mean, it was an attribute of Byte, right? That the most boring parts of the magazine, I've gone on to the table of contents here. The most boring parts were the articles, right? Almost universally. And they had several types of articles in Byte. One was the obligatory, was it Jerry Pournelle, where he would ramble for 60?
That's a couple of years. That's a couple of years in the future from now. I think Pournelle actually got his start in 83 or 84. And so this period for Byte, I think, is really squarely in the sort of hardware nerd, a little bit of software nerd, people who were expecting to actually put together computers. So we talk about building computers these days, right? Where you buy a bunch of stuff and you put it in a box and wire it together. But this was like actually building computers where you would buy parts and wire them together on a wire wrap thing, or maybe it was a kit and you would solder it together. And so it's nothing really like we do. It's at a different level than anything that people do now.
Right, but so some of these articles, I agree, are firmly in that kind of hobbyist. You know, there's this lineage going back to ham radio, Right. Before there were computer magazines, there were ham radio magazines, and they kind of slowly morphed into computer magazines. And lots of articles like magazines like Dr. Dobbs Journal about how to do a thing. But then Byte also, almost from the very beginning, did this thing where they would invite in. I mean, the only way I could describe it is like academics.
Yeah.
Right? So like someone who wrote Lisp, right, would come in and write an article about the mathematical underpinnings of Lisp.
Right. And there's some of that here, obviously. If you look at the authors on the particularly the Lisp-oriented articles, you have like MIT, AI Lab, Stanford University, all of these people who would normally be writing maybe for academic journals or something, but they're publishing here. And I think the most famous example of that is obviously, or is historically, the Smalltalk issue, which is in '81, where they basically got every bigwig from Xerox PARC that existed to write a piece.
Yeah, and if people enjoy this, maybe we'll get to that issue. So let's move on. I'm going to skip the letters page, or the in this Byte page, because it's a lot of text, and then we get to a 6809 board from, looks like, Microdasis, 300 bucks assembled.
Right.
S100 compatible 6809, which is, again, even in if you'd asked me, even 10 years ago, like, was there a 6809 in 1979? I would have said, no, it was a mid 80s type CPU. But
right.
Showing my ignorance about it because nothing used it at the time. Let's keep going. We got an editorial where they're talking about how cool Lisp is. Please read our magazine. And then we got a great ad. I'm going to go to full screen for this mini floppy ad.
Oh my goodness.
And we've got Matthew Broderick from War Games there, obviously.
Right.
Someone's gonna leave an angry comment about that. He looks like he's playing chess against the computer through the power of his Shugart mini floppy. And look at the size of that chunky boy floppy. I mean, that floppy is bigger than like an IBM PC XT, as near as I can tell.
So are these 5 1/4, or?
It certainly looks like 5 1/4,
okay.
Just based on the scale.
Right.
And Shugart was not selling. I mean, were they selling? And this must be an advertisement. I guess it's for people who are building their own system. Yeah.
And I would think they were mostly OEMs. So, if you bought disk drives from Commodore or Tandy or whatever, right, that's the manufacturer. But I don't actually know.
I feel like someone needs to tell this dad that he can learn to play chess without building a computer.
Also, where is I think the more interesting thing about the ad is really the context of where the computer is sitting. Like, what is this place?
That is absolutely a basement. That's like a basement rec room, right? That's a dad cave.
Right.
I mean, although there is,
on the other hand, it has all these office supplies in the back. So what's that about?
Yeah, and the chalkboard to recheck Monday's PO number, meeting at 11:30 today. So, yeah, maybe he's taking his kid into the office to play with the computer. So,
Anyway.
Going on, we've got some letters, and here we could see people, solving things via assembly language. Switch back to the landscape mode. I always found these, what's really weird is occasionally, if you've been in kind of how small this world was. I have read Byte and seen names of like people I knew and recognized, which doesn't feel like it should be possible given how many people use computers today.
Right.
We have a Computerland ad, and this ad I do want to call out. It's interesting because this ad, unlike the Krememco ad, this is where they're starting to try to explain what might you use a computer from. You could see there's a couple here and a kid who have popped an Apple II on their obviously dining room table for some reason. In the home, a computer can be used for personal budgeting, tracking the stock market, evaluating investment opportunities, controlling heating to conserve energy. So real focus here on, no, it's not just a thing to play with. It's really going to change your life.
And
which
the funny thing is that that list of things to do with a computer at home has basically stayed unchanged since 1979.
well, but there is a difference, right? Because like, let me tell you, 1979, storing recipes, you were not going to store your recipes on the computer. Or if you did, it would be to the protest of everyone in the house and no one would ever you would do it to show that you could do it, but no one would actually use it. Whereas today, I feel like, yeah, I keep my recipes in the cloud and I actually use them.
Right. But it's interesting to ponder like how many of these things the systems are actually good at now. Right. The recipe stuff is pretty good. Home control, are we really there yet? Do people really want to do that?
Watering your garden?
Yeah.
Tutoring the children? No, please. Can you imagine? Can you just imagine 1979? Like, yeah, we pulled our kid out of school and we just the Ohio Scientific Challenger 2, and it takes care of all of that.
Right.
All right, I'm going to keep scrolling. We're on now to the first article. I don't think we have to read the article. I think we can note it. It's an overview of Lisp by John Allen Signetic.
I think this article plays in the longtime Lisp fantasy that, oh sure, we have this weird syntax with the parentheses, but actually in real use we're going to layer something better on top. So all the examples are sort of play to that idea, but it never actually happened.
And he describes Lisp as a high-level machine language.
Right.
Is it really? I mean, maybe. Well, I don't know. I think of a machine language, even a high-level machine language, as something that fundamentally follows the pattern, follows the mechanisms of the underlying machine, right? C is recognizably kind of like on top of a von Neumann architecture that's storing and loading things. I don't know that I'd say that about.
Yeah, I mean, this was the period of time where there were pieces of hardware that were specifically designed to execute Lisp.
That's true. That's true.
Although how different the microarchitecture was versus, really what that amounted to was they were implementing Lisp interpreters in microcode.
I want to skip a few pages here. So there's this article, there's a few more ads that are kind of profoundly uninteresting. On page 17, we get to an Apple II ad. Get to page 17 here. How to buy a personal computer. And this ad, again, I want to draw that context. It's all about why you might do it. It says how, but really it's about why. And boy, do I want to punch that dad in his face. I mean, that is all the people in this, except maybe the kid, have just these awful expressions on their face.
Yeah, and it's always some like pre-teenage boy using the machine.
I do think it's interesting that there's not a screenshot here, but you could see how completely illegible the screen is. Like there's visibly some sort of game on it, but you can't actually make out what it is.
Well, they probably can't either because that's a TV, right?
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about this ad is it's Apple clearly punting on the idea of direct sales, right? It's all about go to your computer store, because they're the people who are going to close the sale. My parents bought an Apple II basically for me in, I want to say like 1980, 81, something like that. And yeah, the people at the store do a lot of heavy lifting to convince people, middle-class people back then, to lay out a ludicrous amount of money, what was then a ludicrous amount of money.
Yeah, we had a computer store about 20 minutes from where I grew up. And what the main thing I remember about it is that all the kids would go there to copy software.
Yes. I used to hang out at Radio Shack and play with the TRS80s. That was my jam. So then we have another article on Lisp-based systems for education. And again, another very academic, University of Stuttgart from Stuttgart, Germany. We're not going to, again, I think us reading the articles on YouTube is not going to make for interesting watching. So I intend to mostly focus on the ads here. But on page 22, the last page of that article, we get our first kind of down market ad, right? This is someone who couldn't afford graphics, couldn't afford a full page ad, or didn't want to pay for one. And it's just some dude. Call Tony Winter, 21B Dryden Chambers. This is the ad for GW Computers Ltd. And what they've done here is they're showing you a screenshot that isn't a screenshot. Again, this gets to the you can't actually take screenshots. So what they've done is they've basically laid out, these are the menus from our program. And here they are. You can enter accounts receivable, accounts payable, which actually I think is a fairly clever way to deal with the limitations that you had back then. We got 200 pages to go through, and we're not going to go through all of them in our relatively brief video. Is there something in this issue particularly that you want to make sure we talk about? Because we could jump there. Let's
see. I think we should skip the Chieftain ad. We'll let people imagine what that might be.
Oh, God. Now I'm looking for it. Oh, yes. I see it. Let's not put that on screen. I agree.
And there's the Heath Kit ad, I think, is historically interesting because this was a computer. I knew people who built these kits. Basically I forget who owned Heath. Eventually, I think they were owned by Zenith.
Yeah, because the H19 became the Zenith.
And so what this kit was essentially a computer terminal and then some parts to build a single board computer. Right. And you would solder together the main board and put it inside, and you got a thing that was vaguely analogous to like a TRS80 or TRS80 Model 3, since the screen is built in. And anybody who's old, has used computers that are old enough will recognize the form factor of the terminal, because those terminals actually became fairly widely used.
Right. To the point where even after the terminals were long gone, most people using any workstation would typically Z19 or H19 was like the kind of normal screen term cap mode you would use, right?
Yeah, generally either that or VT100.
Two things I want to note about this. Again, this is not a screenshot. This is not even I don't think this is a photograph. This looks like an illustration to me.
Yeah, it might be it's possible they could have composited it on like a single negative or something. So they took a picture of the screen at one exposure and a picture of the rest at another, and then put it together in print. But
I'm just looking at the chassis, and the chassis looks like it was illustrated.
Yeah, actually, that's true. That's true.
And the other thing I want to point out is there is a cost here, which is $1,195 American dollars, American $1979,
right,
without floppy. So you're talking in today's dollars, I'm estimating $3,000 to $4,000 in 2022 dollars probably,
right,
for a terminal. And that was a good price back then.
Yeah, I mean, VT100 certainly cost that much for just the terminal, and actually they had like more computer in them than some of the computers that you would buy, right? I think I was looking for unknown reasons at like the hardware manual for VT100 ones, and it has like an 8080 CPU in it, just to be a terminal. So
yeah, this thing has two Z80s. I never knew that. Yeah. Why does it need two?
Well, it's one for the computer and one for the terminal.
Oh, I see. Oh,
the interesting
I missed that this was not a terminal. I managed my eyes glazed right over that.
Right. The interesting thing to ponder is whether, like, on the Apple II, there was direct control of the display on the Apple II, and certainly the Atari computers and whatnot, right? There was direct control of the display using some sort of something analogous to what we might call a graphics card now. So what I'm wondering about this computer is, given that there's the two CPUs and it's built into a terminal, is like the only display interface, the serial interface to the terminal. So essentially what you're doing is building a single board computer and hooking it up to a built-in serial port to do the IO. And so there would be no graphics and so on and so forth, just text.
Well, moving on. There's another one of these, someone from the AI lab, pattern directed invocation languages. Again, an article vaguely related to Lisp. And you can kind of imagine what happened here, right? Which is that 6 months before this issue, Byte sends out like some sort of, basically goes in and starts saying, hey, soliciting articles. We're going to have an issue on Lisp. You want to get published? do this.
Right.
We got some more ads. These aren't okay. Here we go. Let's go to the Hamburger ad, which is on page 39, which is advertising. 2 cents a byte.
Oh boy.
Okay, let's get over there. 2 cents a byte. That's a lot of money. So $349 for 16K. And I don't want to make a habit of kind of hammering home the Moore's law aspects of this. We're looking at things that are 40 years old, so of course they're gonna be cheaper. But again, no screenshots of any sort, right? I mean, it's a hardware ad, so yeah.
They don't even mention. So I was hoping they mentioned whether it was dynamic RAM or static RAM, because this was I don't think there is any static RAM sold.
At this point, I think it all would have been
right.
Dynamic RAM.
So
let's jump to page 43.
Okay.
There's an Altos ad here. So Altos was the nerds, viewed these guys and MITs, I think, as like, an alternate future where the Apple and TRS-80 didn't exist and everyone used type computers.
And there was the other one, like IMSAI.
Yeah,
I think was the other big S100 vendor, right?
And it was always this promise that, well, it's S100, so you could just plug into the standardized bus.
Right.
So we learn at a very early time in computers that standardization is a mixed blessing because it lets you do things earlier than you otherwise could, but it ends up being a limitation in many ways. Let me, we've got a few minutes left here. Okay, I'm going to show this. Let's look at the sexist ad 2 pages ahead. I feel like I want to not dwell on it, but I feel like we got to wrestle with it, so to speak, that this is a very sexist kind of milieu, dating again back to ham radio. If you go look at the ham radio magazines from the early 1970s, you'll find ads and like the number 2 or 3 tactic would be throw a good looking woman on it. Yeah,
and certainly like the stereo hobbyist kind of literature would have this stuff in it too, probably even now, to be honest. So
it's very sad, and it is a, the fact that has exerted so much influence on a hobby that really has nothing to do with any kind of gender identity is unfortunate. So let's see, what do we got here?
So if we jump towards the end of the magazine.
Sure, what page?
Let me find it.
Oh, I know what you're going for. Are you going for like the Computer Factory?
Yeah, that's what Jade Computer. There's a particular one. Yeah. So 255.
255. All right. Hold on.
Is Quest Electronics. And
I'm going to deliberately scroll through these. This is the number 1, I'd say, style ad where you have just like unreadable, hugely dense blocks of everything that's for sale. And arguably, there are people who bought Byte mostly for these, right?
Yeah, and this is sort of, I think if you move forward in time into the Windows, like the Windows 95 kind of era, this outfits like Computer Shopper are a direct derivative of this style of advertising. It's just what they're selling is different. Right, they've gone from selling parts to selling whole systems, but the overall style is still very similar. And what's so the interesting thing about this particular ad is that they're selling this this single board computer that nobody even remembers anymore. You can look it up on Wikipedia, but RCA had a short period of time where they were trying to sell consumer hardware, and they had this CPU called the 1802, which is actually a pretty wild architecture, if I recall correctly. It's like stack based or something. And for a long time, in every issue of Byte, there would be this ad for the Cosmac Elf, which may be the second or third best name for a computer. ever invented.
If we kickstart a replica of this, we could probably get like $500 each.
And somewhere down here, there's also an ad from Percom where they're trying to sell you, among other things, a special kind of cassette just for data storage.
I see it, the Pylon 30 and Pylon 10 data cassettes.
Right.
Pylon coded pressure pad. Ooh. And there's also some software here on the right. They're selling software, on cassette. So this is right. 79, I feel like people were starting to use disk drives, but really only very fancy lads had them.
Right.
And then by, I'd say, 1981, the industry managed to convince everyone that a disk drive was table stakes.
Yeah, when did Apple start selling their floppy drive?
So I'm sure we're going to get a lot of comments as I get this wrong, but from memory, Apple was one of the earliest ones because Woz wrote this, essentially disk 2 ROM for a shoeguard drive. And before that point, I think most people felt that this was just out of reach for a small computer, that it wasn't possible. I'm sure that I may not literally be right, but certainly my impression has always been that Apple was one of the earliest machines that would let a normal person kind of hook up a disk drive and use it for things.
Yeah. So
I know that Radio Shack's Model 3 had a disk drive, but I think that was by 1980. So that probably was after this.
Right.
You know what we should do? Actually, I'm going to go back to that Apple ad and see if they're see if the smarmy people are looking over a computer.
Yeah, I think there was a disk.
There we go. There is a disk drive on that computer. So yeah, certainly by 1979, we know that the disk 2 existed. Anything to say about the back? I want to jump to the back page, and we've been doing this for about a half hour, so we might call it here. But if we look at the back page, there is Ohio Scientific. Let me go full screen for this. And then I'll zoom in. Again, it just blows my mind that, it's in Aurora, Ohio. Wasn't that Wayne's World, or was that Aurora, Indiana?
I think they were in Illinois.
Yeah. So this is probably, if I had to guess at their history, some nerds from Ohio State or something.
Yeah, or it could be some kind of like defense contracting situation too.
And this machine is crazy, right? So I've never heard of this machine before. This is the Challenger 3. I'd heard of the Challenger 2, which is this kind of lovingly hand-built, clunky blue case that looks like an Apple II. The notable thing about this is it has 3 CPUs in it: 6502, 68B00, which I'd never heard of before this moment, and a Z80. So you could run CPU on it.
I would imagine the 68B00 is just a variant of the 6800.
So Pete, you had something you wanted to say about reader service cards.
Yeah, so if you go all the way to the back of the issue, there's this page called Reader Service, and it is actually just an index to the ads. Even back in the day, the joke was always that the real reason that you bought Byte was not really for the articles, but for the ads, which we've talked about a little here. But next to each one of the vendors for the ads is a little number. And actually, if you go back to the ad page, you'll notice that on the ad itself, they always mention what number to circle on the reader service card. And so what you would do is, if you were interested in what the vendor was selling, you would cut this card out, circle all the numbers, and put a stamp on it and mail it back, I assume, to the magazine publisher. And the magazine publisher would put you then in touch with the various vendors who you were interested in, and you would get more communication from them. And this was sort of the way you would get in touch with them. Short, if you were just a single person, or rather just a normal person who didn't have like a sales team or something to talk to these people for you.
Also super useful for the magazine itself, because this is evidence that they could take to these advertisers and
Right.
say, look, 362 people or however many
Right.
asked for more information about your product. Our ads are effective. Please buy more full page ads.
Right. So this is some sort of like conceptual mashup of Yahoo and Google AdWords in 1979.
Right. And the other thing is I find it very convenient, like just looking at this reader service page, which is on page 264 of the magazine. Like I immediately see ads that we skip that I want to look at. So for example, the TRS80 software exchange, I got to look at that, is on page 198. Let me find that. 221. Oh, this is going to be good. I can feel it already. We're into the real down market section. Yeah, this is the stuff. Okay, TRS80 Solutions. And again, no kind of screen grabs, just kind of like boxes and text. You could see Scott Adams' adventure. If you imagine that Colossal Cave adventure takes way too much RAM to fit on a home computer, Scott Adams wrote these little tiny adventures that would fit in on any small home computer, and they work actually quite good. Small business software, just great stuff. You were saying when we were still setting up that you saw an ad that was related to CompuServe. Right?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the outfit, unfortunately. It's one of these dial-up online services, and it was a subsidiary, I think, of CompuServe, or maybe the umbrella company that owned CompuServe. Maybe we go back and find the page later. But the interesting thing about the ad was they specifically called out that the service was available like weekdays only at night, so 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. But weekends you could use it all day. And so I think that reflects that the actual resources that they're using for this service are used for something completely different during business hours.
The other thing I want to call out that I think is kind of interesting is if you look at some of these very busy ads on around like there's no page number here. Near the end, like page 262, 261, priority one electronics. These ads could have come straight out of the ham radio magazines unchanged.
Right.
Like a lot of these companies. So it wasn't just historically the users of these early computers, these kits were ham enthusiasts, but also the vendors. The vendors kind of came along with their customers for the ride.
Yeah, and in the same time period, if you go and look at old issues of Sky and Telescope and Astronomy magazine or whatnot, there are ads that are almost exactly the same, except it's all telescope hobbyist stuff. So I think this is a sort of universal form for any of these kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, nerd hobbies.
So there's another computer I've never heard of here on page, I want to call it out, 125. I'm going to switch to portrait mode so we can get a good look at it. And go to page 125. It's the Minimax computer. You ever heard of this one?
No.
Yeah, this to me is one of the reasons I read old Bytes is just to, or old magazines in general, is just to see these things that it's amazing how much of a monoculture there was not at the time. And, without regard to whether that's good or bad. A $4,500 computer. So in today's dollars, probably you're looking like $13,000 to $15,000 with 108, about 100K of memory and 2.4 megabytes of disk storage. That's actually pretty impressive.
So that would have been a hard disk.
Yeah. And 240 by 512 graphics. Is that a portrait? Feels like a portrait.
Yeah, that's portrait.
Interesting. It doesn't look portrait in the picture. So there you go.
Oh, here it is. Page 65 is Micronet.
Page 65. Let's take a look. get to see me scrolling through page 66. So close. There we go. Mail to CompuServe Micronet. Remote online computing service available via local phone lines from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. Also implicit in this is calling any phone line more than a couple miles away from your house is going to cost you money per minute.
Right.
My dad signed up for one of these online services, and it was one of the ones, I guess they all at this point were charging per hour. And since they charged you for the amount of online stuff you did, there's just a huge incentive to never use the thing. Basically, I got yelled at whenever I used it. My experience.
Right.
But maybe the internet.
Yeah, and actually a few pages forward from this on 71, which I didn't realize before, is an RCA ad for that RCA computer that we talked about before. And it has some graphics on the screen. So
it does. But you can see it's not it could be composited, surely. Right. But this looks more to me like they just got the lighting right and took a photograph.
Right.
What is that? The auxiliary keypad is.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I think what that would imply is that you're essentially if you're interacting with the machine except to run the prepackaged software, you're like in the machine language monitor all the time, right? Because it's a hex keypad.
Right. Yeah, it sure is. There's no keyboard. Synthesizer. I'm sold. I want one of these. You'd think RCA also using is. So it's not, doesn't look like a special monitor. It looks like they've just got hooked up.
It's just one of those TV things.
RCA TV, which makes sense. Cosmac VIP lets you add computer power a board at a time. So is this an S100 bus thing or custom?
Probably not. But
Chip 8 interpretive language. We might have to learn Chip 8, dude. I mean, it might be.
I'm pretty sure the Wikipedia page on this talks about some emulation.
Cool.
So if you really wanted to play with it,
I think there's not enough hours in the day to do every weird computer interpretive language we're going to find here. And they're in Lancaster, PA. Another non-Silicon Valley company. All right. I think that's good. Cool. This has been great. I really enjoyed doing this. I'm willing to do it again sometime. Take a trip down memory lane.
Yeah, we'll do fourth next for Stiglitz.
The fourth issue of this magazine is great because every article is by a super defensive fourth nerd explaining why, no, really, it's not terrible. It's going to be the future.
Yeah, and actually contrasting that with Smalltalk. I mean, the Smalltalk issue for people who know it is like bathed in golden nostalgia because everything that, to a first approximation, almost everything that they talk about, right, in that issue has kind of come to pass. Mm-hmm. Just like except for the programming systems aspects. But fourth is still basically fourth.
Well, this has been Zero Page. We've just taken a look at this 1979 issue of Byte. There's a lot in here that we didn't cover. Pete, I want to thank you for joining me. And if people like this, make a comment in the comments below this video. And maybe we'll do this again sometime. Maybe we'll do that Smalltalk issue.